right. Let's now move on to our next set of presenters. So we've got a dynamic duo coming up in Alexandra Sills and Christina Hotalen. And their talk is Spartacus and Metal. And let me just offer you a few little tidbits on both of our speakers. Alexandra is a master's student at the University of Leicester School of Archaeology and Ancient History. Her research focuses on Roman gladiatorial spectacle and its adoption, adaptation, and reception in the Eastern provinces, discussing cultural identity and performance. Her recent publication, The Tropification of Hollywood Heroes Thrown into the Arena, explores the apocryphal depictions and narrative similarities between various screen gladiators over 7 decades. She is a regular contributor as well to badancient.com and workingclassicists.com, where she discusses a variety of topics from combat body image to adaptations of Roman recipes for the modern home cook. And Christina is the program manager for the Institute of Social Science Research at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she promotes services and grant opportunities for the social sciences to the UMass Amherst community. She earned her PhD from the University of South Florida in Tampa, where she specialized in gender and women, material culture, and digital humanities in the late Roman Empire. Since then, she has turned to ancient women in metal music, has presented papers on the Roman Empress Messalina, everyone's favorite, and goddess Medusa in metal. Currently, she is writing on the Empress Agrippina in metal for another conference. Will you please join me in welcoming our speakers? Take it away, Spartacus in metal.
Thank you. And I think before we begin, huge thanks to Nat for providing such a tough act to follow.
Seriously. Can I have screen sharing privileges, or I don't know if someone wants to control that. Oh, cool. Okay, give me 1 second.
Okay, just while we're getting the slides up, quick content warning. We're discussing gladiators and war, so there will be some violent imagery on the cover art. And there's also some extreme political ideologies discussed as well, just so everyone's aware. Okay, the slides ready to go?
Yep, let's do it.
Gladiators have remained fascinating for centuries, thanks to their uniquely violent glamour. One in particular has achieved immortal fame. Spartacus's story has inspired political movements, art, literature, and cinema. Both the real Spartacus and the fictionalized depictions of him deviate greatly from the archetypal gladiator. Despite Spartacus achieving a level of perpetual extended fame, his more typical contemporaries never enjoyed. Moderns have imbued Spartacus with an ideology shaped by their own reading of his biography, ideology that is apocryphal and diametrically opposed to the ideology exhibited by conventional gladiators in their role as instruments and exemplars of Roman ideas of virtus. Metal as a genre has embraced stereotypical gladiators and the anomalous Spartacus alike, using gladiators as the ancients did to interrogate their own thoughts on masculinity, honor, courage, imperialism, ideology, and mortality. This paper asks if metal draws the same lines in the arena sand between the quasi-Marxism of Spartacus and the Colosseum as the ideological state apparatus of Roman imperialism. What we're attempting here is a select survey of metal music, referencing or exclusively about Spartacus. In particular, we note how bands are inspired by historical texts and Hollywood films, and also how the Spartacus TV series reintroduced Spartacus to new audiences in the mid-2000s. Now, for context, Spartacus is a blank slate. We have no sources from him nor his comrades, and the sources that do talk about him are written from a Roman perspective long after his death. We have no quotations and no stated manifesto. But because he was fighting for a cause, he has been successfully used as a subsequent figurehead. The lack of detail surrounding his own ideology means that he provides the perfect canvas for modern ideologies. Because we do know that Spartacus was enslaved into a particularly brutal profession and fought to break free, those who similarly seek to break free from oppression have chosen him as their archetype, particularly communists. For instance, in 1951, American communist Howard Fast self-published a novel about Spartacus inspired during his own imprisonment for refusing to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. By 1960, it was adapted into the iconic Stanley Kubrick film, the screenplay of which was secretly written by another American communist, Dalton Trumbo, who at the time was blacklisted as one of the Hollywood 10, also for refusing to testify. Because of the communist pedigree of the writers, the studio executives were too cowardly to leave the screenplay alone. All traces of Spartacus as a credible threat, including all scenes of his many battlefield victories, were excised from the film. Spartacus was demoted from a messianic idol to a principled man doomed to fail. This more sober, pessimistic portrayal of Spartacus was nevertheless iconic and effectively hamstrung the idea of Spartacus as a communist hero from then on. If Rome was, or is, considered in cinema to be the allegory for capitalist post-war America, then all credible threats must not only lose, but lose completely. In 2000, a gladiator portrayed on screen, Maximus Decimus Meridius, did cause societal change, albeit unseen and ahistorical, and surely the questionable sequel will have to confront that. But Maximus did not replace Spartacus for the left. Rather, he has been adopted by the far right. That film has caused a ripple effect, leading to gladiatorial imagery becoming an alt-right dog whistle, second only to the 300 effect and myth-making around the Spartans. So on screen, for a myriad of reasons, gladiators have shifted from the far left to the far right. Does the pattern repeat in metal?
So gladiators have been a subject of interest for metal bands since 1980, with the release of Manila Road's debut album, Invasion, where gladiators fight for their freedom in the song Empire. According to Encyclopedia Metallum, an online database of metal bands with recorded material, Gladiator appears on 252 song titles, lyrics, and videos. Spartacus, meanwhile, presents significantly fewer results, just 41 tracks and once as an album title. The first song about Spartacus was released on a 1984 demo by Steel Assassin from Massachusetts, who re-released it 3 more times. In it, Spartacus leads the rebels from Mount Vesuvius following their victory in the Third Servile War, emphasizing their passion to fight, and concludes with their determination to win with no one stopping them. Spartacus began gaining popularity from 2000 to 2009, showing up in 11 songs, perhaps a resurgence in interest following the release of Gladiator. The catalog of Spartacus and those referencing him grew rapidly, coinciding with the Spartacus TV series that aired on Starz between 2010 and 2013. Similarly to art and cinema, the story of Spartacus, an adaptation in the 300S Starz series, reintroduced him to new audiences. This increase suggests that the debut of the TV series led to a renewed interest in Spartacus, where his story resonated with new audiences and was seen as a symbol of masculinity and a rebel against the Roman status quo, and of course, the spectacle of violence is entertainment.
Now, it's worth mentioning here that the ideology of the Starz series is rather muddied. Spartacus is back to being presented as a credible threat for the first time since 1960. He is tactical, skilled, and shrewd. He is a true match for Crassus and a plausible threat to Rome, which historically he does appear to have been. He is also firmly and vocally against slavery, oppression, and the casual cruelty of wealthy Romans, who are most definitely the villains of the piece. Whilst they outrank Spartacus in money, agency, and prestige, he and his comrades possess a moral nobility that the uber-rich Romans cannot match. So far, so left. And it should also be mentioned that this is the only gladiatorial movie or show to feature positive queer relationships. The cast is the most ethnically diverse, and whilst it can't exactly be called feminist, there are more female characters with names, speaking roles, and narratives than any other gladiatorial example on screen. It's not woke, but it's close. However, the series does have the same fascist aesthetic as Gladiator, and more particularly 300, using similar CGI effects, cinematography, and soundtrack, and it also glorifies a certain amount of toxic masculinity. It speaks like a socialist, but it looks like a far-right ideal. It's a show that cannot decide who it wants to appeal to, and may thus provide diverse inspiration.
Okay, so the band Martyria from Rome released 2 songs about Spartacus on their full-length album, Roman SPQR. Much of their discography is focused on ancient Rome, and the lyrics demonstrate ample research. Spartacus is standard on school curricula that most Italian pupils would be familiar with, explaining the band's knowledge of history and culture. Are You Afraid to Die is a 26-second track of dialogue between Spartacus and Antoninus, who served with Spartacus in the Third Servile War. The dialogue is a combination of 2 quotes lifted from the 1960 film. Antoninus asks Spartacus if he's afraid to die, to which Spartacus responds that he is not, since death is the only freedom a slave knows. It is interesting that Martyria latched onto the minimizing of Spartacus from the 1960 film. Alexandra notes that this minimized Spartacus decides that whether he lives or dies, Spartacus ultimately wins, for death is victory. She notes that this idea does not come from the sources, but rather producer intervention to make certain that Spartacus is never capable of winning without him appearing like a loser. The song Spartacus is about gladiators wanting to break out of captivity and look to Spartacus as their leader. From killing the guards and taking their weapons, seeking refuge in a forest, and recognizing that the 6,000 crosses along the Appian Way is Crassus's, quote, golden cage for his birds of prey. It concludes with the death of Spartacus and that the world is not a better place 2,000 years after his death. With Spartacus gone forever, quote, we are still halfway. It is unclear what those lyrics mean. Are we halfway to a better, more just world, or is change impossible? Spartacus is the title of a single album by Italian death metal band Ade, whose discography focuses on Roman history with lyrics in both English and Latin. The combination of death metal with elements of folk music is Ade's way of connecting with their history and cultural identity, and upholds the stories of their ancestors. The eponymous album focuses on Spartacus and gladiators, setting the tone for the cover art. The artist Phlegeton, known as J.L. Ray, graciously provided us with context behind the art. Ray explained that Ade wanted to combine Spartacus's story with, quote, death metal vibes, war, blood, sand, legions, and slaves all in the mix. On the cover, we see Spartacus on the left engaged in head-to-head combat with Crassus opposite of him in military garb. Their positioning symbolizes the clash of opposites. The 2 translucent figures overseeing the battle from above are the gods Mars and Hades, who subtly influence Spartacus and Crassus's destinies, adding a unique twist to the narrative. Behind Spartacus and Crassus are the men fighting with them, standing in blood and amongst dead bodies, giving it a, quote, death metal touch that the band sought to emulate. Ray explained that the cover aims to embody the ancient, solemn Roman arena tones that the band wanted, a Spartacus tale within the realm of death metal. Like other bands, Ade's album features heavy use of Latin phrases, presumably to both spotlight the ancient subject, but also to add some academic weight to the lyrics. The song Divinitas Victor paraphrases, be patient and tough. Someday this pain will be useful to you. Advice that loses potency once its source is revealed, which is Ovid's advice to himself when dealing with a particularly harsh dumping by his girlfriend Corinna. We are born unequal, we die equal. Fits with the theme, despite being Seneca's musing on the multiple civilian deaths when the city of Lyons burned to the ground. Death dissolves all things is not attested anywhere in ancient literature. It is a quote that paraphrases from a 1357 poem by Petrarch, but mostly features in the 16th century as a legal phrase regarding mandates ceasing to be valid upon the death of either party. Roma SPQR is also guilty of taking phrases out of context in an attempt to impress. Martyria use of morturi te salutan, a phrase often repeated by Colosseum tour guides and metal bands alike. 51 songs featured as a lyric, but the phrase translated to "we who are about to die salute you" is misused. Its only use in ancient literature comes from Tacitus and is spoken by condemned criminals forced to participate in a mock sea battle. It sounds impressive when evoked, but reveals a lack of understanding of the complex machine of Roman spectacle. It is striking that no lyric quotes the sources on Spartacus nor Crassus. The only quotation taken directly from a discussion of Spartacus is Martyria's use of the 1960 screenplay. Despite the cultural cachet of songs and albums using Latin, it appears that the research involved was rather rudimentary. It is little wonder then that the rest of the lyrics of this album are rather superficial, without presenting any definitive statements on the servile war. Despite the TV series ending in 2013, metal bands continued writing songs about Spartacus until 2021. Gladiators remained a topic of interest to metal bands, being depicted on album cover art and mentioned in lyrics. While most songs retell Spartacus and his fight for freedom against the Roman state, other bands used Spartacus to push their own nationalistic agendas. In the song Premier Debut, Spartacus seemed determined to signal their far-right ideology with as many misappropriations of antiquity as possible. In one verse, they evoke 3 ancient warriors in turn: Spartacus, Titus, and Alexander the Great, an odd triumvirate. Titus is included because he raised the Temple of Jerusalem. Alexander is included as he is with similarly far-right anti-Semitic bands as the ultimate macho white man conquering the Eastern barbarians. Spartacus, darling of the Marxists, is an odd inclusion. We suspect he is included for his profession, ultra-macho gladiator, and because he is the real gladiator with any name recognition. Ancient gladiation did have an ideology about masculinity, martial prowess, and imperialistic ambition, and alt-right groups away from metal have co-opted their imagery in response. But Spartacus is famous specifically because he denounced the ideology of Rome in the arena. The band seemed to gloss over this, likening these 3 men to the Volksstrom and Hitler Youth. In the chorus, they say, "First to stand at the call of glory, with the blood of traitors, let us write history. Like gladiators, by the strength of the lion, let's crush the beast, the avatar of Zion." This imagery absolutely fits within the existing alt-right misappropriation of gladiatorial imagery by the far right. The earlier inclusion of Spartacus ultimately misunderstands everything we do know about the historical man. Of all the bands surveyed, Spartacus are clearly the least informed of any historical context.
Metal has not followed the political binary of Spartacus left, Maximus right. While Spartacus's presumed intentions of resistance and liberation are admired, the Romans are not set up as the villains of the piece like they are in cinema. Given the Italian nationality and/or heritage of the musicians discussed, along with their nationalistic tendencies, there may be motives for not wishing to criticize Rome or prominent Romans. But these bands don't make an overt political statement at all in their use of Spartacus, which is unusual, particularly in comparison to cinema. Spartacus became a modern icon, specifically because he was co-opted as a political symbol. These bands appear to be making, apart from Fracas, a concerted effort to remain neutral and to avoid political commentary altogether. Far from using Spartacus as a cipher for their own ideology, they appear to be discussing the story merely due to its violent and dramatic nature. What we see here is a depoliticization of Spartacus, both in context of his profession and the Third Servile War, which in itself ignores that gladiation was an inherently political institution, and that the uprising was an inherently political act. The violence of the arena and the war both served a purpose. Recounting these violent actions outside of this context serves no purpose beyond providing light entertainment, stripping gladiation and acts of rebellion of their meaning. None of the bands consider the context of the story, despite using factoids and Latin to give the appearance of academic rigor. And by failing to do so, they glorify violence purely for violence' sake. Spartacus is indeed a blank slate, but it's one that bands have only chosen to doodle on. Where some bands have co-opted Spartacus and Gladiators for their own nationalist agendas, the majority are simply drawn to Spartacus because of the violence of his profession and war, themes that resonate in metal music. The lyrics of these songs are dramatic, but they have nothing original or meaningful to say. The bands want the glamour of the arena, despite their subject detesting it so much he literally started a war to escape it. Spartacus's profession is crucial, not his rebellion. Him being a gladiator lends him a macho magnetism missing from other rebels against Rome. By refusing to think critically about the nature of the arena or rebellion, these bands have Spartacus trapped, providing superficial, violent entertainment for the listeners. And ironically, they are misrepresenting and misunderstanding Roman gladiation, spectators, Roman oppression, and Spartacus as a man himself. As such, the lyrics are a collection of trite, superficial stereotypes. The story of Spartacus is compelling and inspiring. However, metal musicians have failed to discuss him with the innovation, imagination, and empathy as the novelists and screenwriters, preferring instead to revel in violent cliché. Thank you for listening.